Okay, so I am so excited to have you chatting today about something that has been such a gift to my life. And I want everyone who is listening to go right now, pause, and buy a copy of Amy Suardi's incredibly beautiful book, My Beautiful, Terrible Pandemic Life. I love it so much that it's painful because I start tearing, because especially the beginning, I went one page, one day at a time. Because what you were writing was so deeply resonant and beautiful that I needed to marinate in the words.
Mm.
And most people know I am a voracious, manic reader. So for me to take one page a day is like a thing. That's like a really
Wow.
I just want you to start. Will you please read on page 4? Will you read Everything is Stopped? I'm just going to cry this whole time we're talking.
Sure. I mean, sure, I'll read and feel free to cry as well. So this was written on March 18th, 2020. Everything is stopped. I take a walk by myself after dinner in the last blue of day. The houses are glowing amber. The people inside, tending children, closing windows, facing computers. Birds trilling and sirens wailing are the only sounds. Fuchsia magnolias, flowering pears, and ballerina pink cherries perform to empty theaters. Sometimes I want to catch this sickness, to know this beast, wrestle it in my body, and make all this destruction as ferocious as its cause. Because all this shuddering up and waiting at the window when no one I know is sick feels like we're afraid of one big ghost.
Again, silence, mic drop. Like that would be enough.
Wow.
But your writing, I'm going to read one too. This is a shorter one. You can't cry on Zoom, especially since I'm crying on Zoom. March 23rd. The day before the start of distance learning, the middle school principal said this to parents in a Zoom video conference. Our faces at the top of the screen like blocks in a quilt border. You're not expected to be your child's teacher. The most important thing is grace. We need to give ourselves grace, give our children grace, and the world grace. And I wanted to cry for her kindness, her forgiveness, her grace, but my camera was on.
Yeah, that was one of my first experiences with the Zoom thing. And, now I might feel more comfortable crying, but there were all these people I didn't know. And it felt like kind of a meet, whatever, a PTA meeting or something. And I was like, hold it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was such a new world, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
were all navigating. So tell me about the creation of the book. Tell people who are not familiar with you and your story. A lot of people are neighborhood people and are so excited about this. I know we've been hearing it in the community of people who've bought copies for their friends and their family members. So tell us a little of your story of this creation, of this birthing.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a creative writer, but I've kind of, it's threaded in and out of my life. And in the past few years, I had decided, this was my new thing. Diana, my youngest, so after 15 years, a few years ago, all kids were in school. And that was sort of my turning point where I was like, this is my new thing, is work on my creative writing. So for the past few years, I had been mainly working on a memoir and doing others, all sorts of stuff. But the interesting thing is that I never really felt confident about, I never felt good about releasing it, sharing it. I always felt like I wasn't ready. The writing always felt somewhat difficult. And I felt like, oh, I need to do this first. I need to have an author platform. I need to take this workshop. I need to, get published in one place for, all these things. And then the pandemic hit, and so we're all of a sudden I was just like, I have to write about this. So many, I think I'll be unpacking what happened for years, but I think it was the urgency, like this panic, like our lives are not going to go along just more or less normal the way we expected them to. This is not going to happen. And it was, when schools closed and we were seeing what was happening in Italy, where my husband's family is, and it just seemed like a tsunami was about to, pull everything up and just pound it down on us. And it was terrifying. And I was just, I think it was all that writing and the practicing and the workshops and all those things weren't for nothing, because I started writing and it was flowing. I just needed to get it out. And this time, the thing that was different was that I really just wanted to communicate. It was a sense of preciousness. I gotta write this down, but it was like, oh my God, can you believe this is happening to the world, to people, to the world? I wanted to communicate instead of, is this writing good enough? Will people like it? Or, am I going to be approved of? Am I going to be accepted? Are people going to think I'm good or not? That was gone. It was just like, whoa. And writing became my way of just, processing my feelings, getting it out, communicating, just documenting so many things. And so I started this, I had this web address, Painting with Words, that I was going to do something with, one of those many projects that I didn't really, I started and just couldn't finish. And so I just dusted that off and then started publishing these things. I put maybe like 2 weeks of writing in there, and then I sent it out to people, and then I kept writing in it. I just needed to, and I wanted to. And so it just built up, it was just writing and sending these sort of missives out into the world. And it was the way I survived this horrible time, this, solitary time. But I had the writing to comfort me and to be my friend and to help me process all the, intense feelings that were going on. And so I am grateful for, the book is really a product of the writing, the channel that I was given to, to get through this.
And to
crisis.
really document the year. It just feels like such a beautiful moment in time and documentation. On 25, you do at the end of that chapter, at the end of that page, say, another thing has changed too. Before this calamity, writing was so difficult and I was scared to show it to anyone. Now that there are bigger things to be afraid of, writing keeps me alive. And ease has burst from difficulty, a strange abundance out of scarcity. And I think this is it's so, of course, synchronous. I'm experiencing synchronicity because this morning I was listening to this Kabbalah talk about how shock can ignite energy.
Interesting.
And not for everybody, not all the time, but for some, the shock to the system can create action.
Interesting.
And when I was going through the book this morning and reading that page, because I wanted to talk about your writing process and like your practice, and you have 5 children, and you are, one of the things that struck me was how much you're cooking with them and how much home stuff they know. I was like, man, she is a Renaissance mama. They are like knitting and sewing and gardening and cooking and making things and painting. And I'm literally laying in bed like, y'all okay over there with your Netflix? I'm reading about Amy's, wow. And I would bring Sailor and be like, look what Mark knows how to make. They're setting up lunch. We're ordering from Uber. Like, it's just like a hilarious, like, oh my goodness, like how you have such an incredible gift with your children, the way that it comes through, the time and the real deep like spaciousness for responsibility and parenting at such a deep level. And your kids are such a big age range that I just could picture the whole thing kind of playing out so beautifully. But that shock to energy or shock to action is what stood out from that talk this morning and then reading it there. So did
Yeah.
anything in like your writing practice change or your creative energy change, or talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I no longer, so with the kids not at school, it was not like, okay, drop them off and now go to
Yeah.
my writing room and produce, and often it was like, okay, I gotta write for an hour and a half, and I'd set a timer, and it was almost like a forced, sometimes it was torturous, sometimes it went better, but it never really felt like I really wanted or need, had an urge to do it. It was like I want to do this, but it's hard and I got to make myself.
Yeah.
So with the pandemic, it really was like I started doing all those things that they say you should do as a writer, but I never did before, like take a notebook everywhere you went. I did because I knew that maybe if we're at the playground or something, I'd want to jot something down or I'd notice something. And so I just, took it upstairs to the bathroom with me, took it downstairs to have breakfast. I just brought it with me. And sometimes, yeah, I would just pick it up and jot something down. Or, when I was having a difficult time with the kids or something, I could sit there by myself and write and sort of, cry into my notebook. And
Yeah.
so it was always there to collect things. And then when I had some time, like if they were playing outside well by themselves or watching something, I would type up what I thought would be good for an entry. And then over just like in the cracks of life, I would revise those pieces. I would spend a little time on the computer when I could, like because this was all happening in the spring and the summer, I did a lot of writing on the porch. So like while they were riding bikes or something, I put my computer on this little makeshift table we put out there and was, soaking up the fresh air and seeing neighbors walk by and watching the kids, but also getting some work done. And so it was just weirdly natural. It was like, I just got it done when I need to, like, it just happened. And, something broke open during the pandemic and I don't really understand what it was. I think it was partly the layers being burned off or just, everything collapsing, society in a way collapsed. So my role in society, like I wasn't seeing anybody anymore. So there wasn't that, I think I had a lot of shyness about my writing. So I knew that I wasn't going to run into people at drop off and they'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe, so then I'd have to face them after putting something really personal out there. So there was like this protectiveness of the quarantine, this darkness that was nurturing and soothing to me. And I feel like I've always been a writer, but I'm also relatively social. I'm an obliger and I'm very concerned about other people's feelings and is everybody good? How's the harmony? Did I say something to upset you? And then, oh my gosh, I've got to fix that, And so I spent so much time, trying to get all my relationships and my area, my community feeling good that there wasn't a lot of time for understanding how I was feeling.
Right.
And even considering that to be important. So the pandemic changed that. It was a terrible gift. Beautiful, terrible gift.
And there's this layer of your Italian family and kind of what happened in the earliest stages of how emergency extreme Italy was, and what we were getting from it. And your husband's a doctor.
Yeah. He's a doctor in a psychiatric hospital. Yeah. So they weren't, treating people with COVID, but they had the outbreaks at the hospital. So it was scary. I mean, they lost a few nurses, they lost some patients. I mean, it was a real thing, and he had to go. His schedule has not changed at all. He has had to go in
Right.
just as much. In fact, he is working more, and it's been more stressful. So the kids and I were home a lot, but he wasn't. So it was, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
everybody had a totally different experience of this. What was beautiful about it in a terrible way was that the whole world had the same problem.
Yeah.
And that it connected us, we were all vulnerable. We all have lungs, we all have skin. And so to me, it just like broke down all the barriers and sort of leveled, nobody was a superstar anymore. Nobody was at the bottom of the rung, because we were all just in this. Of course, everyone's experience was different.
Yes, right. Naming the privilege of the different technology access and having schools. I mean, there are levels and layers, but there was an essence of everybody is struggling and figuring out how to get out of this in their own sort of pit. And some were higher and some were lower and some were deeper and some were wider and some were darker. And yet everyone was in it.
Yeah. And, yes, coming from a place of privilege and comfort, and, we have this house, we have a garden, or, a yard. The kids.
What one is that? Oh my God. Page.
But go ahead.
You have the house, the pink boat.
Yeah. Yeah. We painted our house pink, and I had this vision that our house was a boat and we were riding it through the storm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like a 6-line poem. Our pink house.
Page 13.
Has become a ship bearing us through this storm. And then I think about the people in Italy who had an apartment, and no balcony maybe, or,
right.
Separated from, adult children separated from parents, there's so much suffering in our country, so many people who could not quarantine, who, were considered essential. And so we're out there on the front line, our soldiers, and, so much. I mean, just reading the paper every day and seeing the suffering, the job losses, entire industries just collapsing, people out of work for months, just all the hunger, the food lines, all that, like, it just broke my heart. And I needed my heart to be broken. Yeah. I needed to feel that. I needed to not be so protected and closed and like going through my life, I needed to have my heart ripped and ragged for a while, and try walking through life like that and feeling how what other people are going through. And it allowed me to also feel my own heart, which I didn't realize I'd closed myself to as well. So that was a side effect.
Did any of your children say anything about it? Like, don't write about me, or we want to see.
I asked them before I published the website, before I went live, I asked them if I could, and I gave them some examples, and I showed them, what, would this be okay? And before I, put the book into print, I did the same thing. I with each member of the family, I went through all the places that they appeared. Is this okay? Is this okay? So they were basically okay. I mean, Mark and Luke especially thought it was hilarious. All the times that I talked about how they were naughty or threw Diana's shoe in the litter box. Let me see that part again. I'm like, they think it's funny. So, we had, some good times with it. The whole thing about the shining silver still cracks me up.
Yes.
Anyway.
And now, what do you think from now? Are you still writing? Tell me, do you want to write another book? Or was this open up so that now you feel more comfortable and this will be a bigger part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I am still writing once a week on the same page, painting with words. So it's slowed down a little bit, but I'm still writing because the pandemic's still going on. I still feel called. I want to document my life. I want to process my feelings. I want to remember this time,
Yeah.
and I want to communicate. It's flowing, so I'm going with it. I've also started to work again on one of the projects I was working on before, a longer one, which is, more of a challenge for me. It's like basically a novel length thing, but it's it's my next challenge to see if I can do something that I by myself in my room without this constant, like, putting out to the world some feedback, without this constant communication with the world.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes harder for me. I get, I don't know, a little lonely, or what are people gonna think? It just, like, sometimes the brain, the self-doubt comes in. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I I'm no, the writing thing is there and it's gonna stay. So that's wonderful. This has, like, opened the door, and I will keep doing it in different forms, I'm sure.
I always like to ask people who've overcome, a challenge or a struggle or something that they like longed for, but then weren't doing. Like someone's listening and they're like, oh, I really want to write a song, or I really want to like choreograph a dance, or I want to write a book. What would you say? Like, what are some good, strategies?
Yeah. I've spent, like, kind of 50 years of my life feeling the same way. And I feel like in a way, this happened to me accidentally. So I would first of all say, if it's been happening for a while for you, and it's not happening, it's okay. Like, I consider myself a late bloomer. Like, it sometimes takes a while. I needed to I guess the trauma, broke me open. And of course you can't recommend that, or you would never want that or wish it on anybody. But sometimes the worst times can be the best times.
Mhm.
And I it's really hard for me to admit that and say that, but there's something about when we get in our normal life, we get in our little routines and going our way and our little track, and we wrap ourselves in layers and layers, and it insulates our own heart, our own connection to our soul, which I think is what we need in order to access that love, that soul longing. We need the connection with the soul.
Yeah.
But everyday living and everyday society is not really conducive to that. So it just requires you breaking into that somehow. And whether it's, spending time alone, doing retreats, knowing that, I think one thing that the pandemic taught me is that everybody is vulnerable. Everybody has feelings. Everybody wants to know that you are real and imperfect, and you freak out, and we all are made from the same stardust, and if we can just keep reminding ourselves that we're all in this together. And I know it doesn't feel like that many times, but it's just so important to keep feeling that, and relaxing into the sense of togetherness, so that we can be okay with being ourselves.
And I think so much of the creative process, like now you have a tangible book and you're holding it in your hands, but in my experience, it kind of like scratches an itch, but then a new itch comes up. Like it's like the creative process, especially when aligned with soul callings or cravings, is just cyclical. It's not like, oh, done with that, oh,
Yeah.
phew, now I'm all set for life and I can kick my feet up. Like the creative beast, at least my goddess, is very like, like, create podcasts, write, draw, then you want to sing. Like she's constantly wanting me to prioritize her longings and desires. And I
Yeah.
just say that because I think sometimes people have, people will reach out to me and be like, I want coaching to write my book because I'm not getting it done, and then I'll be done, or like, then I'll be good. And I really look at the whole process much more as like just one of the wheels of our life, is like creative work and creative longings and callings, in my experience, don't go away. Even when you do one thing, then, you know, there may be a pause and a contraction and like an exhale and a rest, and then it re-engages. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, because I think that the creative the creative outflow is really an expression of soul, and you always want to be in touch with your soul. So you don't want to be done. You know, yeah, sure, you might want to allow your voice to go out into the world, but if you're done, then you've closed yourself up again. And also that I spent many years thinking that I want to get something out in the world because I need to prove that I'm good enough to be here. Like, it sounds crazy, but you know, so like basically my whole life, well, I'm not, somehow I don't belong. You know, somehow I snuck in here and they're going to find out that I'm not good enough to be here. I'm going to be kicked out. And so this, you know, my writing has to be perfect. It has to be just right. It has to wow everybody, you know. And so obviously it was not going to flow. Obviously it was going to feel difficult. It was not going to come because nothing can live up to that standard. So it's very hard to quiet that part of oneself that needs the approval. It's very hard. I mean, it just, for me, it just kept coming back. I would think I was, you know, oh yeah, it's flowing, this is what I want to do. And then it would retransform itself and come back again and with a different face on. And it was always somehow weaseling around to look at me from the outside. You know, it was the self-conscious, like, how are people going to see me? And so anyway, I think I have a particularly, it was a big struggle for me. Maybe it isn't so much for other people, but you want the connection to the soul. And so if it's done, then hopefully you'll want to do more. It's not about that. It's just like, it feels good to read. You know, I always would like flip through magazines and, you know, look for books that expressed what I want. Like, I want to see what was basically, I wanted to see exactly what I wanted to see and read exactly what I wanted to see that felt like me. But I never found it. And then finally I realized, like, I have to write it. I have to feel so much reading, but feeling it come out of you. And that freedom that it has to flow and into the world.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting too, because sometimes the dance between like what you publish and share publicly and have that relationship and that feedback versus, or in addition to, or complementary to what you're privately working on and working with. And in my experience, I need both. So like external, like being able to write a blog post or an email newsletter or something where someone says, me too, you know, there's a connection and it kind of is motivating.
Yeah.
But I've been working on this like lifelong book journey memoir piece that I love, and I don't want to share it with anybody. Like, I want to be in relationship with that sacredly and quietly and like intimately, and I don't want to have it out in the world yet. So I just also say that there's like external and sort of front facing, and then there's also behind the scenes, because a lot of people will say to me like, I want to write a book and just publish it and like get to that, but there's so much behind the scenes. There's so much intimacy with your writing or your work or the creative process. And that's what I'm hearing from you too, is like you have the painting with words and you're sharing that, but you're also working on other projects that are not so public right now. Is that true? Hold on.
Right. Yeah, for sure. During the pandemic, it was this have to communicate. Oh my God, can you believe what's just happening to us? All this intense to document and get things out. And then when things started slowing down, I was like, I felt sort of inside, and uh, eventually realized it was, I think something else needs to be born. So I realized it was time to slow down on website, and that's where I'm working. I know what you're saying. I need to do this in private. I don't want to workshop it. The way I've been working on this has been people.